I never imagined the woman I loved could betray me. But when I found Cassie leaving Ted's hotel room, looking disheveled and guilty, my world shattered. She said, "Nothing happened." But I knew better. I've spent years devoted to my family, sacrificing everything, only to be repaid with lies and deceit. The pain fueled something darker inside me, a cold, calculated plan for revenge. They thought they could play me, but I'll make them regret ever crossing me. This isn't just about justice. It's about making them feel every ounce of betrayal they inflicted on me. The beginning of the end, my ears were still ringing after the loud noise, and I felt dizzy and sick. After a few moments, I managed to get to my knees and suddenly felt the urge to throw up. "Not this," I said out loud. I leaned back against the wall, trying to collect myself. I was shaking from the shock of it all. Then I noticed my shirt was changing color. It had been white, but now it was becoming red. I realized I was hurt. At first, I didn't know where the blood was coming from, but a sharp pain in my forehead gave me a hint. I carefully touched my hairline with my right hand, and it came back covered in blood. This made me feel sick again, and I gagged, but nothing came up. As I steadied myself, I gently checked my injury. I felt a cut across the left side of my forehead. It was bleeding a lot, and it hurt quite a bit. While I was trying to understand what was happening, I looked to my right. Most of the others were getting back up, so I took a moment to check my injuries. I remembered that head injuries often bleed a lot, but usually aren't too serious. This thought comforted me a little. I tore off a piece of my shirt and pressed it against the cut. The bleeding slowed down. Then I looked at the rest of my body. A quick check showed no other injuries until I looked at my left leg. My pants were torn there, and blood was starting to seep out. It was harder to tear apart the injured part of my pants. When I looked, something was sticking out of my leg. I held my breath and pulled it out. Then I quickly tore off 2 larger pieces of my shirt, wrapping one around my head and the other around my leg. After checking and bandaging the wounds, I felt more at ease knowing they probably weren't life-threatening. This reminded me of something I believed for a long time. When you're born, God gives you a time to go. I thought today wasn't my time yet, but deep inside I worried that it might be. It's strange how a regular day can change. When I woke up this morning, I had some big issues, but I never thought I would be in a life-and-death situation. I remembered how I got here. It started when my wife Cassie wanted to have a talk. Andy, can you come in here?" I heard my wife Cassie call as soon as I stepped into the hotel room. "We need to talk." I had just arrived for a vacation with my family in Mexico City. We were staying at the Fantasia Hotel, one of the newest and most beautiful hotels in the city. It was where my family and I planned to spend the kids' 2-week spring break. My name is Andy Spencer. I used to work as an accountant, but now I'm a freelance writer. Things between my wife Cassie and me have not been great for about 6 months. Our connection has felt different, and I wasn't sure if that was because she was busy or if something else was going on. I took a later flight because I was finishing up an article about Miss America and her special diet for Women's Fitness magazine. After some negotiation, they agreed to pay me $3,000 if I included pictures. This trip had been planned months ago by a group of couples from Cassie's office. It was clear she was unhappy about my delay. She didn't care that it was for work. Cassie was also upset that I had turned part of this vacation into another writing job. I assured her it would only take a day or 2, but she was still annoyed. A few months ago, Mexico had a new president, Carlos Sanchez, who aimed to deal with the drug cartels in a different way by targeting their businesses. This approach was proving more effective than many expected. Fox News decided to send one of their top reporters, Maria Shivers, to cover this new drug war. They hired me to organize the financial information and write a thorough report on the situation. They chose me because of several financial articles I had previously written, including one that kicked off my writing career. I spent months reviewing a lot of financial data and discovered that cartels had a strong hold on many businesses in Mexico, which was quite concerning. Even more troubling was their involvement in foreign companies. Interestingly, the financial article that started my writing journey was a task assigned to me when I was still working as an accountant. The management asked me to write for a trade magazine about recent tax changes. At first, I found it frustrating since it felt like extra work. However, I ended up liking the process, and when it was published, it received positive attention. It was featured in several newspapers, including the Wall Street Journal, and my company even had it reprinted. Cassie was very proud of my first article, but lately she seemed less impressed with my writing. When I shared my news about the assignment in Mexico, Cassie had a very different reaction than the kids. Her expression turned serious, and she made it clear she was not happy. On the other hand, Kevin and Sally were excited. Kevin's eyes grew wide, and Sally beamed with joy. Kevin had loved broadcasting ever since he put together a radio kit when he was 10. Even though Cassie and I tried to guide him toward other careers, Kevin remained excited about broadcasting. Once I saw how passionate he was, I stopped opposing his choice. This decision didn't sit well with Cassie. She believed Kevin was making a mistake with his future and felt I was encouraging his wrong choice. Cassie also had an interest in broadcasting, but her focus was mostly on the famous people. She spent hours reading fan magazines, and her style reflected what her favorite actors were wearing. "That's so cool, Dad," Kevin said, overflowing with excitement. "Really? You want to ruin our vacation?" Cassie scolded. "I can't believe how selfish you're being." "It'll just take a day, maybe a day and a half," I replied. "Most of it's written. I just need some more facts that I can get in Mexico. Then I can wrap it up. After the producer looks over it, I'll be done. It's not a huge deal. Plus, they're paying me $4,000. "Who's doing the series for Fox?" Sally asked eagerly. "Maria Shivers," I told her. "Maria Shivers?" Sally exclaimed. "Wow, she's incredible. Can I meet her?" "Sure, I'll make it happen for the whole family," I said, trying to be accommodating. "Do you think the crew will let me watch?" Kevin inquired. "Yeah, I think that's possible," I replied, hoping it would work out. I'd spoken to the cameraman and sound engineer earlier, and they seemed nice. They wanted to review the segments I'd written to prepare for the shoot. But this last-minute work was creating a gap between Cassie and me. Now that we were finally in Mexico, it felt like Cassie's frustration had reached a boiling point. I knew we needed to have a serious conversation soon, but I wished we could have it after our vacation. I had my suspicions about my wife, but I had no clear proof. Other than our less active relationship, I hadn't noticed any typical warning signs. Cassie didn't go out with friends much and only occasionally stayed late at work. She brought a lot of work home with her. Although I rarely called her at the office, she always picked up. Even if she was busy, she usually returned my calls within 15 minutes. Cassie didn't seem secretive with her messages, and we shared an email account. She might have a secret email account that I didn't know about. Still, no one called or emailed to tell me they saw my wife with another man. I didn't know for sure if my wife was being unfaithful, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something was wrong. If my wife wasn't being untruthful, why was I nervous about this talk? Our problems had been growing for a while. My wife had been pulling away from me over the past 6 months. In reality, our issues had been building for the last 2 years, but they became more serious in the last 6 months. To me, it seemed like Cassie was very focused on getting a promotion at her accounting firm. Her father always wanted that for himself, but never achieved it. Now it was Cassie's dream, and it had turned into an obsession over the last few years. About 2 years ago, it started with gentle nudges for me to return to the firm. Then Cassie began saying they needed me back. That turned into comments about how I was wasting my talents. The criticism grew, and it felt directed at my career as a writer. I wasn't sure if Cassie was unhappy in our marriage or if she was preparing to discuss bigger changes. I realized that I needed to be ready for what she had to say when she started talking about how a man could earn his wife's respect. "What do we need to talk about, Cassie?" I asked as I sat down on the couch in our bedroom. "Andy, I'm tired," my wife said firmly. "I'm worn out from doing everything while you do whatever you want. I feel like I'm carrying all the weight around here." "Really? You don't think I do my part?" I replied, trying to stay calm. "For starters, I pay most of the household bills," she said with a look of frustration. I felt my temper rising, but I tried to keep it in check. "It depends on what you call household bills," I said. "When you chose to buy that big house, I told you I wasn't comfortable with it and wouldn't help pay for it. But you went ahead anyway. Plus, I handle all the groceries, the kids' clothes, and their activities. Even with our insurance, I pay all the extra costs." And I pay for our medical insurance, she replied sharply. That's through your job, I pointed out. They still take my share out of my paycheck, Cassie argued, not backing down. Oh, you mean the small amount for that? You forget that I cover all the gas for our cars, I said, trying to keep the conversation focused. I cover all the car expenses and insurance, remember? You should do that as a husband, Cassie replied, her voice getting louder. We sat in silence, looking at each other. I had come to Mexico with good news about my writing, but now I chose to keep it to myself. It was obvious Cassie didn't respect my work, no matter what I achieved in writing. I was tired of her dismissive remarks. I loved her and our kids, but it felt like Cassie was moving in a different direction. Finally, I sighed and said, This isn't just about bills, Cassie. What do you really want to say? Cassie shifted her seat, trying to find the right words. I'm being considered for a promotion to junior partner. Ted Walker is leading the selection committee. He says the senior partners pay as much attention to the candidate's family as they do to the candidates. There it was, the source of my troubles with Cassie. Ted Walker. I had worked with Ted briefly when I was an accountant, and he had reported to me. I wasn't impressed with him then. He relied too much on his charm and looks. He was smart and had the potential to be a great accountant, but he was also quite lazy. It was normal for accountants to review each other's work. At first, Ted brought his work to me for checking. I found many mistakes and had to point them out, which made him very angry, especially when I put my concerns in writing. Now I sensed this was his way of getting back at me. He seemed determined to undermine my marriage because I had criticized him. Ted, being clever, started having some of the female accountants check his work instead. They probably noticed the same issues, but they didn't say anything. When Ted eventually submitted his work to me, it looked perfect. I should have pushed for more, but I didn't have the energy. Now, for the past 6 months, Ted was Cassie's boss. He had turned his charm toward her. Ted had the looks of a magazine model, tall, handsome, and with a youthful smile. At parties, he was always the center of attention, chatting with everyone. Naturally, Ted was already a partner, and in Cassie's eyes, that made him someone really important. Cassie seemed completely taken by him, and I felt helpless. She wouldn't listen to anything negative about him. Any concerns I raised were dismissed as jealousy from others. Our marriage felt like it was falling apart, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. Even the fact that Ted had been divorced 3 times didn't seem to matter to Cassie. The interesting part was that Sylvia, wife number 4, was the one he really wanted to keep. She was not only lovely, but her father was very rich. If the rumors were even half true, he had more than $100 million. Sylvia had lost her mother about 5 years ago and was an only child. Things started to get difficult in my marriage about a month after Ted arrived. For 18 months before he came, Cassie had been asking me to go back to my accounting job. After Ted got here, things changed. She started making unkind remarks like, "No work to do this week?" or, "Do you think you'll ever sell one of your books?" Then Cassie started complaining that I wasn't earning enough money. This past month, it was a mix of everything, plus her saying I was holding her back. I was left wondering what Cassie's goal was. Her attitude was becoming too much to handle. I let out a big sigh and rolled my eyes. What's bothering him this time? Your political articles, Cassie said, explaining further. They're too controversial. Ted thinks they will make the firm look bad. So writing about the issues in our country today is too controversial? I replied coldly. That's sad for your firm. What else is Ted upset about? I asked. He says the partners are very unhappy that you are writing for The Federalist. So what? I was feeling angry. I'm trying to earn a living, and we still have free speech in this country, last I checked. Stop acting like I'm not smart. I noticed Cassie was getting upset now. I'm not acting like you're not smart, I snapped back. I'm trying to have a reasonable talk with you, but you're not making sense. This whole situation made me feel both sad and angry. Cassie and I had been married for 15 years. We got married while we were in college, right after our first child, Sally, was born. It had been a tough time, juggling work, caring for Sally, and going to classes. But those challenges and our shared goals made us closer. I first met Cassie at the University of Texas in Austin. She was 2 years younger than me. When we first met, I was completely impressed. She was a petite beauty at 5'3" with dark curly hair and bright blue eyes. But it was her gentle nature that really attracted me. Cassie was a bit shy, but had a kind heart. Back then, she would have helped anyone. Now she was still beautiful, but her caring side seemed to be missing from our lives. All we saw was a woman focused on her career. In college, both Cassie and I studied accounting and shared the ambition of being hired by a major firm and rising to partner status. It seemed like Cassie had absorbed this goal from her father. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was pushing himself too hard in a futile effort. Cassie was a strong student, but I was even better. I graduated with high honors and received offers from 3 major accounting firms. I chose the one with an office in Austin so Cassie could complete her degree. They also promised to assist with my student loans if I stayed for 3 years. When Cassie graduated, I helped her secure a job at my firm. She was intelligent and hardworking, but I knew her chances of rapid advancement were low. Nevertheless, I supported her. Despite my concerns, Cassie moved up the ranks, albeit at a slower pace than I did. I was on a fast track to a senior position, but I faced a significant issue. I was unhappy at work. Meanwhile, Cassie started to doubt whether she would reach her career goals. Instead of giving up, she dedicated herself even more to her work. Unfortunately, this also meant she was unaware of my growing unhappiness, and our relationship began to show strain. Though I think she didn't realize it, Cassie had grown somewhat distant from our children, Sally and Kevin, over the past 2 years. Kevin was younger than Sally and had become somewhat separated from her. Cassie loved him, but at times it felt like she resented how he affected her work ambitions. The last 6 months had been particularly challenging, as she missed many of his activities. Now, the kids were starting to feel the impact. I believe Cassie knew deep down that she wasn't the best mom, but I was sure she also placed some blame on me. I loved her dearly, but I was exhausted from watching our marriage struggle while feeling powerless to change it. If Cassie hadn't been involved with Ted, I believed it would have just been a matter of time before something shifted. As I watched her in the living room, I wondered where this conversation might lead. Finally, Cassie let out a frustrated sigh and began to pace. That's when I realized it didn't matter what I said. Ted would twist my words. Cassie was so focused on her career that she couldn't see anything else. "Isn't it upsetting that I earn so much less than you?" she said, sounding defensive. "Don't you have any pride? If you can't respect yourself, how can I?" "No, it doesn't bother me," I replied, my voice sharper than intended. "And it didn't bother you until Ted became a part of your life." "Ted is not part of this," Cassie said, defending herself. "That's not true," I exclaimed, frustration rising within me. "I have plenty of self-respect, and I really dislike that you're trying to undermine my feelings." Cassie flinched a bit, her confidence wavering, then her voice softened. "Andy, you're one of the best accountants I've ever worked with. I know our firm would welcome you back in a moment. I even heard Fred is retiring, so you might have a chance to get back on the partnership path." I looked into my lovely wife's eyes, and it seemed Cassie really wanted that for me. Perhaps she still cared about me, but I wasn't so sure. I thought that Cassie just wanted me to have what she saw as a respectable job. But I had made up my mind. I was never going back to accounting. If she couldn't support what I was doing now, then our marriage was likely in trouble anyway. This talk felt pointless. Once Cassie decided something, it was hard to change her mind without a really big reason. I was tired of waiting for things to fall apart. "I don't want to argue about this anymore," I said, feeling worn out and sad. I still loved this woman deeply. It hurt to see our marriage fraying. I had a sense of where this was heading and wanted to get it over with. "So just say what you need to say." "I can't keep living like this," she said with uncertainty in her voice. At least Cassie hadn't mentioned another man. Still, this conversation was tearing me apart. But I knew it was better to have it all out in the open. Just get it over with. "Okay," I said, trying to stay calm. "You don't respect me, and you think I need to find a real job. Is there anything else you want to add?" My wife looked unsure, but pressed on. "Andy, I'm tired of being judged because of my husband. I'm tired of defending you all the time. Ted told me the partners aren't sure about my next step. I've worked too hard to lose everything because of your choices. How can anyone respect someone who avoids responsibility?" I looked Cassie in the eyes. I was sure she noticed the frustration in mine as she turned away. "I have never avoided my duties," I said sharply. "I've been at every event for our kids. How many have you attended? I take care of repairs and the yard for our home. What do you do besides hire someone to help at the house? And despite how you've treated me, I have loved you completely, so maybe we should not go there." I stood up and we held each other's gaze. I fought to keep my composure. I had no clue what Cassie was thinking, but I had to find out. "Okay," I said, finally feeling a bit calmer despite the hurt I held. "What do you think I should do?" A smile appeared on Cassie's face as she opened her briefcase. "It's straightforward, Andy. I've talked to HR and I have a job application here for you. I also spoke with a few partners, including Mr. Bracken, the chairman. They all support your return to the company. The starting salary would be $200,000. I glanced at the application and set it down on the coffee table. "What if I don't want to come back?" Cassie opened another folder from her briefcase. "I consulted with a family lawyer. If you don't finish your writing tasks and apply for a job at my firm or another one in 90 days, I plan to start divorce proceedings." That hit me hard, and it felt like all of this was arranged by Ted Walker, but Cassie couldn't see that. I felt defeated. The only thing running through my mind was a line from a Kenny Rogers song, "Know when to hold 'em and know when to fold 'em." It seemed it was time to fold. I picked up the divorce papers and quickly read through them. "Should I move forward with the divorce? You'll find the conditions are reasonable. Andy, I really don't want this and I don't want to hurt you. But Ted insists that if things don't change, I can't become a partner." I looked over the divorce papers again. She was right. It was a fair agreement. She would give me half of the house's value, combine our retirement accounts, and split them. There would be no child support, but she would have the main custody of the kids. I would have good visitation rights, and she would pay me $3,000 a month for 5 years. I felt angry. I took out my pen and made some adjustments before signing it and dating it. "Why wait?" I asked, placing the divorce papers on the coffee table next to the job application. "I've changed the terms. First, I don't want anything from that house. That was your choice and your money. Also, I don't want any alimony or to deal with your retirement account, even if it's worth much more than mine. I want joint custody of the kids. I've signed it so you can file it whenever you want." "I am not seeing Ted," Cassie said, shocked and angry. "It really doesn't matter, Cassie. If you haven't yet, you likely will after the divorce is done. This is a good arrangement for you. Just sign the papers." "No," she insisted. "I said I'd give you 90 days, and I'm sticking to that. I hope you reconsider." Before my frustration boiled over, I grabbed my laptop and left the room. Cassie watched as Andy left, feeling upset about how the conversation turned out. I was shaking with emotion. It seemed like a simple decision when Ted and I talked about it. I was torn between feeling upset that Andy brushed off my worries and realizing that he was ready to move on without me. Ted had told me that if I stood my ground, Andy would change his mind. I thought the meeting would be hard, and I expected Andy to argue. I never imagined it would turn into such a mess. I didn't expect Andy to behave like this. But maybe Ted was right. Maybe it was best for me to move on. I definitely felt a strong connection to Ted Walker. Was Andy right that I might develop feelings for Ted eventually? I didn't know, and that thought frightened me. Ted was everything that Andy wasn't. He was someone people admired. I could see how clients and co-workers sought his approval. Most of the women in the office had a fondness for him. Andy looked good, but Ted was even more appealing. Ted was a leader in his field. He represented what many might wish to achieve. It was all very confusing. Andy and I had shared happy times, but maybe it was time for both of us to go our separate ways. Why was Andy making this so difficult? Ted seemed to have a better perspective on my situation. The more I thought about it, the more frustrated I became with Andy for being inconsiderate. He knew how much becoming a partner meant to me. It had taken a lot of hard work to get as close as I had. I felt like I was finally making progress when Ted arrived from New York, and now Andy's actions were jeopardizing that. I'd heard some complaints about Ted before, but they seemed to come from men who felt threatened by him. There were rumors of unfaithfulness, but every time I saw Ted with his wife, Sylvia, he was caring and attentive. However, Sylvia often seemed distant, especially to the other women around Ted. I wanted to talk to Ted, but since his wife would be on this trip, it wouldn't be wise to just call him. Sylvia wouldn't appreciate that at all. Still, I had a business meeting planned with Ted and a few others tomorrow night to go over several clients and discuss what I needed to do over the next 3 months to secure the junior partnership. I thought maybe I could bring up my issues with Andy during that meeting. Perhaps I should just go ahead and file for divorce, but I had promised to wait 90 days. My home life felt like it was falling apart. The connection Andy and I had shared for so long had been wonderful. I think I fell for Andy the moment I met him. He was attractive, though not as much as Ted, but it was his eyes and smile that truly drew me in. Andy had kind eyes, and his smile made you feel warm inside. At first, I would get jealous when other girls flirted with him, but after years of being married, I trusted Andy completely. Now, everything felt different, and I was unsure about our relationship. Thankfully, Ted was there for me, ready to help no matter what happened with Andy. This whole situation had really shaken me. I started to wonder if I was drifting away from my husband. Just a year ago, I couldn't imagine that happening. But it was real. I didn't feel the same respect for him anymore. When I compared him to Ted, Andy seemed to fall short. Andy had written 2 books, but neither had been published. He must have received a lot of rejections. It was sad to admit, but he didn't seem like the same man I had married. If I couldn't respect my husband, then our marriage had a hard road ahead. I wished he could be more like Ted, and if Andy didn't improve, I didn't know what would happen. The thought of divorce made me feel uneasy. If Andy wouldn't change, would I really go through with it? If I wanted to move up in my career, I might have to, right? Just then, someone knocked on the door. I opened it to find Kevin and Sally standing there. "Is Dad here?" Kevin asked. "His things are here," Sally said, noticing his suitcase on the bed. "He must be back. Where is he, Mom?" "It's not my job to keep track of your father," I replied, a bit harshly. Both kids paused and looked at me. "Did you and Dad have a disagreement?" Sally asked carefully. "That's not something you need to know," I shot back. "They had a disagreement," Kevin said, grabbing Sally's arm. "Let's go find Dad. I want him to be my partner for the trivia contest this afternoon." After they left, I sat on the bed feeling even angrier. Andy was turning our kids against me. I needed to talk to Ted. He would calm me down and help me figure things out. I looked at the divorce papers on the coffee table and was tempted to sign them. That would make Andy see things differently. When he returned for reconciliation, he would have to let go of his writing dreams. And when he came back, maybe I'd take him back, and maybe I wouldn't. But what if he didn't come back? The more I looked at those papers, the more I realized I wasn't ready to send them. Not yet. I decided that after 90 days, if Andy hadn't changed, I would file for divorce. Andy, I left our hotel room feeling embarrassed and angry. In some ways, it was my own doing. I could have pushed Ted away long ago, but I didn't care enough. I didn't realize he was holding a grudge, and now it felt like his actions were affecting my marriage. Back then, I wasn't paying much attention to that arrogant guy. I was unhappy at work and had found my passion for writing. I cared more about improving my writing skills than what Ted was doing. After my first article, I began writing short stories about local people for the community newspaper, and they published all of them. I knew the local paper liked them because they didn't have to pay. But then a few were published in a bigger paper, the Austin American-Statesman. I didn't get any money, but it felt great to see my work recognized. During this time, I also started writing my first novel. When I finished, I tried to find a publisher, but it didn't work out. I received nearly 400 rejection letters. I even wrote to some publishers multiple times with new ideas. Still, they all said no. But I didn't give up. I started on my second book. As I got deeper into writing, my job became more and more frustrating. Meanwhile, Cassie was doing well and received 2 promotions. We were doing okay financially, but I knew I needed to make a change soon. At first, I wasn't sure how to find writing assignments. Then I found several websites for different magazines. I explored the topics they covered and started coming up with my own ideas. After brainstorming a dozen ideas I felt good about, I pitched them to the magazines. My first batch was rejected, which was disheartening. But finally, one idea worked out, and I earned $300. This motivated me to keep trying. Soon, about 1 out of every 5 ideas was accepted. In the beginning, I often had pieces returned, either rejected or with suggestions for improvements. I eagerly revised those and sent them back in. Almost all of them ended up getting published. After a few months, my articles were mostly accepted without returns. Then I pitched an idea to a fitness magazine. I had met a coach who shared his fitness routine, which I thought was great and easy for anyone to follow. The magazine loved it, and so did the coach. That article earned me $750. In my first year of writing, I made about $4,500. But I was growing more skilled and more recognized. The next year, I earned over $14,000. However, I was really busy. Early on, I had promised myself to write only in my spare time, to not take time away from my family or my job, but I found myself breaking that promise, so I decided to slow down on articles and focus on my second book. When I finished it, I had no better luck getting it published than I did with the first one, so I went back to writing articles for magazines. I talked to Cassie about how unhappy I was, but she didn't really understand. She had only been somewhat interested when my first articles were published. Now Cassie didn't care about them at all. To her, it was just a hobby. She kept reassuring me that I was just experiencing a challenging phase and that I would eventually move past it. In the meantime, I shouldn't make any hasty decisions. But then something happened at work that changed everything for me. I got into a disagreement with Fred Tompkins, a partner. I should have known better than to challenge a partner. Fred was not a pleasant person. I really didn't understand why he was a partner. He knew his stuff, but he never did any of the hard work. What made it worse for me was that Fred should never have been in a leadership position. His team disliked him because he took credit for their successes and blamed others for any mistakes. I couldn't stand him, but looking back, I think I should have thanked him. Fred was the one who helped me leave that job I didn't like. As I felt more and more unhappy at work, Cassie was slowly climbing the corporate ladder. I didn't have the heart to tell her that I didn't think she would ever become partner. The truth was that Cassie didn't quite have what it took. A big part of being a partner was finding new business, and while Cassie was a great accountant, she wasn't a good salesperson. Maybe she could aim for junior partner one day, but that was years away, if it ever happened. I knew better than to bring this up with her. It would only cause more problems between us. After a few years, I started getting more writing assignments on my own. But as my freelance work got better, Fred decided to make me his scapegoat. Things came to a head when Fred blamed me for not catching an issue during an audit. We had a heated argument, and he gave me a written warning. I pulled out my work to show that the issue had been found, but the person who finalized the report had missed it. I wrote a detailed letter to New York explaining that the mistake was Fred's because he didn't review the work properly. I'm not sure what happened with Fred after that, but my warning stayed. I could appeal and have a hearing, but instead, I quit. Cassie was really angry that I quit and wanted me to go back and apologize. For the first time, I got really upset with her. I told her that I would never apologize to Fred Tompkins or anyone else. I hadn't done anything wrong. That night, I chose to sleep in the guest room, and I stayed there for 2 more days. On the morning of the 4th day, I found Cassie in the kitchen, visibly upset. She asked if I was going to leave her. I embraced her and reassured her that I would never go unless she wanted me to. She called in sick that day, and we spent the time resting together. Now, I was sitting at the hotel bar, contemplating my troubled marriage. I could have felt sad, but I was mentally prepared for this moment. The situation was clear now. It was up to Cassie to decide what she wanted. I had signed the divorce papers already, just in case. Cassie, the more I thought about my issues with my husband, the more uneasy I felt. Why was he being so stubborn? We should be talking through our problems, but he seemed ready to end our marriage. That made me feel unsure about everything. If we got a divorce, what would my life be like? If Ted was single, would I want to be with him? I knew he was married, and I didn't want to harm his relationship. But the thought of a connection with Ted had crossed my mind, and I couldn't deny that I found him appealing. Until now, the idea of being unfaithful to Andy felt impossible. But with everything going on, I wasn't so sure. I needed to understand if I still loved my husband. My thoughts were a jumble. That night, dinner with the kids was tense. Andy didn't show up. The kids kept asking about their dad. When I didn't want to talk about it, Sally bluntly asked if we were getting a divorce. When I didn't answer, she ran from the table in tears. Kevin soon followed her. Later, they wouldn't respond when I knocked on their door or called them. I decided to give them some space, thinking I could talk to them in the morning. But honestly, I wasn't sure what I would say. When I went back, Andy wasn't there. He still hadn't come home by the time I was ready for bed. My worry turned into concern. I thought about looking for him or calling someone, but I figured he was just upset and that a night away might help him think. Plus, searching for him might make me seem desperate. As I lay in bed, I remembered that Andy was working with Maria Shivers the next day. Kevin and Sally were supposed to meet her too. I had been invited but decided not to go. I considered stopping the kids from going, but I knew that would push them further away from me. I was bothered by the thought of Andy spending time with someone like Maria. It felt even worse knowing that my children were being influenced by him. They were clearly upset with me, and I had Andy to thank for that. He was impressing everyone with his charm on TV, and the idea of my kids drifting away from me made me feel angry all over again. I didn't sleep well that night. I was set on talking things over with Andy in the morning. He needed to understand how I felt. But when I got up at 7, it was clear that Andy had already come and gone. He had taken his things and left quietly. I felt hurt and upset with Andy. He didn't want to listen and seemed ready to end things. Maybe I should just go ahead and file for divorce. This was all Andy's doing. Then there was a knock at the door, and when I opened it, Kevin stood there. "Do you know where Dad is?" "No," I replied, shaking my head. "He must have stopped by for some clothes, but I was asleep." "Are you two really getting a divorce?" Kevin asked, concern in his eyes. "Sally says it's your fault because you're always working." That made me angry. "Well, excuse me, some of us have real jobs." "Whatever," Kevin said, turning away. As he walked to his room, I heard his phone ring. He answered it, and I heard him say, "Dad, where are you? Okay, we'll be there in 5 minutes. Sally will be happy. Are you sure they don't mind me helping? Great. See you soon." I was really upset with Andy. I blamed him for Kevin's attitude. Everything was turning out differently than I had hoped, but I was sure Ted could help me sort things through. We had a dinner meeting set for the day after tomorrow to talk about clients and my schedule for the next few months. Ted had planned some projects that would help me get noticed for a promotion. Then I got a call from Ted. I was surprised when he said he wanted to move our meeting to tonight. The original meeting included 3 other co-workers, plus a chance to talk with some clients. These smaller meetings could help cover some of the trip costs as business expenses. But Ted said this new meeting would give us more time to discuss my future. When I asked about dinner with his wife, Ted told me she was delayed by a day. I was excited about this one-on-one time because I believed Ted could really guide me toward my promotion. While I thought about the meeting with Ted, I also wanted to talk about my issues with Andy. I still cared for my husband, but I didn't want him to ruin my chances for a better job. It bothered me that Andy couldn't see how wrong he was. I was especially surprised when Kevin mentioned wanting to go into broadcasting. It upset me even more that Andy was encouraging him. Broadcasting was nearly as tough as writing. You really needed luck in both to succeed. That was what Andy thought, and it bothered me. As I got ready for dinner, I felt a bit guilty. Surprising Andy with this dinner meeting with Ted might not have been the best idea. He was already looking for reasons to distance himself from our marriage, and this dinner wouldn't help. But I pushed those thoughts aside. It was just a business meeting, and I thought it was important. Andy showed up in a suit and tie, and I had to admit he looked great. The kids were dressed up too, and I felt proud of them. If only Andy could understand my side, everything would be perfect. "You look wonderful," Andy said after taking a look at me. I was happy he thought I looked nice. But my good feelings faded when I told him I was having a business meeting with Ted and wouldn't be able to join them. My children looked at me with disappointment. Andy just shrugged and said, "Okay." Dinner with Ted felt odd. He was playful and full of compliments, but he didn't seem interested in discussing business. When I mentioned my issues with Andy, he suggested I should be more firm. He believed that Andy just needed a little push. We spent a long time chatting about nothing important until I politely asked Ted if we could focus on his plans for my career. He smiled and agreed. Just as he began to share his ideas for the next 3 months, he suddenly stopped. I noticed that the whole dining room had gone quiet. Ted pointed toward the entrance. "Is that your husband with Maria Shivers?" "What?" I managed to say as I turned around. I knew Andy had a meeting with Maria and had taken the kids to meet her, But I thought they would have dinner on their own, not with her. But there they were, walking into the dining room. Maria appeared to be enjoying Andy's company, and my kids were trailing behind with bright smiles. She looked beautiful. I quickly glanced around the room and saw everyone staring. Andy pulled out a chair for Maria, while the kids eagerly rushed to sit across from them, their eyes shining with excitement. Then I noticed Maria move closer to Andy, resting her hand gently on his arm. A wave of unease surged through me, followed closely by a cold anger. How could Andy show her off like this? After that, I barely heard anything Ted said. Ted was also having a hard time staying focused. He kept looking over at where Maria Shivers and Andy were sitting. After Ted paid the bill, I said in a cold tone, "Let's go see what my husband is doing." As we walked to their table, Andy saw me and quickly stood up. "Maria, this is my wife Cassie and her boss Ted Walker," he said smoothly. "Cassie, Ted, this is Maria Shivers." Ted flashed a big smile and moved beside Maria's chair. He took her hand and kissed it briefly. "Miss Shivers, it's a pleasure." Maria narrowed her eyes a bit but gave a tight smile back. "Thank you." Then she turned to me and smiled warmly. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Spencer. You're a fortunate woman. Your husband is very charming and has done great work for our series. I hope you'll excuse me for keeping him from your vacation." "That's fine," I replied, keeping my tone cool. "We'll have plenty of vacation time. Andy has his work and I have mine, but I know we can make time for fun. Kids, let me know when you're back in your room." "Wouldn't you like to join us?" Maria asked, pointing to an empty spot at the large table. The last thing I wanted was to sit with Miss Shivers, but I could see that Ted was really eager to stay. So I chose to go along with it for a little while because I didn't want to make things awkward for Kevin and Sally. I thought we could stay for a few minutes and then quietly leave, allowing Ted and me to talk about my career later. What I planned as a short visit turned into 30 minutes. Ted didn't seem ready to leave. He missed all my subtle hints. He was on his charm overload, but Maria didn't seem very affected. Most of the time, she talked about her upcoming series on the Mexican drug wars. There were still some details she wasn't sure about. When I saw Andy and her chatting from across the room, I thought Maria was being overly familiar with my husband. But I realized later they were just brainstorming ideas together. When Maria liked one of Andy's ideas, she'd give his arm a gentle tap and say, "That's a good one." Even though the talk was about business, they included everyone. Several times, Maria asked the kids what they thought about a particular idea. Most of the time, they agreed with her. Still, sometimes they didn't quite understand or didn't think it was a good idea. I knew Andy would listen to his kids, but I was surprised that Maria also paid close attention and tried to explain things. At one point, she considered what Kevin said and nodded. "I think you're right, Kevin. We'll keep it as it is." At some point, Sally asked what being famous was like. Maria's answer took me by surprise. I didn't expect what she said. "It's tough," she replied right away. "I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. At first, when I started on TV, I loved the attention, but over time I really began to dislike it. You can't go anywhere without being recognized. Like tonight, when we walked in, the room went quiet and everyone was staring at me. I really don't like that. So listen, Sally, being famous isn't what people think. The public expects you to be perfect, and the tabloids always make up stories or find the worst pictures of me. People are just waiting to judge me. So every moment I have to worry about my appearance. It's tiring." "That sounds rough," Sally said sympathetically. "But you wouldn't quit, would you?" "Oh, no," Maria laughed. "I might have made it sound worse than it is. There are great parts of my job, too. I get to meet interesting people and travel around the world. Plus, they pay me very well. Right now, I have a 7-year contract with Fox, and I will stick with it. But once it's done, I plan to negotiate for a bit more privacy. I want to work on more projects like this. If they let me do more during my contract, that's even better." "We should get going," I said, looking at Ted as I stood up. "We still have some clients to talk about and my schedule for the next few months to review." Ted took a moment before standing up. "Yes, of course. Miss Shivers, it has been a pleasure. I hope we can talk more later." Maria smiled at Ted and then turned to me. "Mrs. Spencer, thank you again for letting your husband work with me. This project has been wonderful and I've enjoyed working with Andy." "From what I heard about the show tonight, I think it's going to be great," I said honestly. I was impressed with the project and Andy's efforts, but right now, I needed to have my meeting with Ted. He was the one person who could help me get closer to becoming a partner, and that was my main focus. As we were about to leave, Andy checked his watch and turned to the kids. "Hey, didn't you guys want to see the magic show in the main ballroom? Cassie, are you going that way? Can you take the kids? Miss Shivers and I need to discuss a few more things." "I think the kids can find their way on their own," I said quickly, feeling a bit concerned that he was trying to leave them with me. I noticed Andy's expression shift slightly as he looked at Ted. I felt a wave of relief that he seemed a bit protective. I also realized I had felt a touch of unease towards Maria. She was beautiful, but soon I knew my feelings were unnecessary. There was no way Maria was interested in Andy. She clearly thought highly of him. After Ted and I finished at the restaurant, we went to the hotel bar. We ordered drinks and sat down. Ted took some time to compliment my work and tell me what I needed to do to achieve the junior partnership. He ended by saying that the partnership was almost guaranteed for me. That made me really happy. When we reached the elevator, Ted suggested I visit his room because he had a list of things I should focus on in the next few days. I was eager to see it so I could start planning. Maybe it was the drinks or the excitement of getting closer to my goal or Ted's nice words. Whatever it was, I relaxed too much. Inside his room, Ted looked through his briefcase. "Where did I put that schedule?" he muttered as he kept searching. "Why don't you pour us a drink while I find it? We can toast to your future success." Thinking I was being helpful, I poured 2 drinks and handed one to him. Finally, he found the list and sat on the bed. He patted the space next to him, so I sat down. He began to explain the list to me. There was more praise, which, mixed with the drinks, made me a bit foggy in my thinking. At one point, Ted stopped and looked into my eyes. "Cassie, you're amazing," he said, his tone warm and sincere. I should have pushed him away, but instead I leaned in closer, caught up in the moment. I felt confused and lightheaded. But when he tried to go further, I suddenly woke up to the situation. I pushed him away, but he came back at me. We struggled, and finally I managed to escape. A realization hit me. Ted wasn't really interested in helping me. He just wanted to take advantage of me. I felt foolish for not seeing it sooner. Thankfully, I had stopped things before they went too far. "Ted, what do you think you're doing?" I said sharply as I backed toward the door. "I didn't expect you to pull this on me," he shot back. "You knew what would happen if you came to my room." "Forget you, Ted," I said, grabbing my purse and leaving. As I stepped into the hallway, I saw Andy walking by. His expression made me feel terrible because I knew what he was thinking. How could I have been so foolish? I watched as Cassie left the dining room with Ted, and it hurt me inside. Nonetheless, I had to keep calm until the kids finished their desserts and got ready for the magic show. I didn't want to share my feelings in front of Miss Shivers. "This has been a lovely evening," Maria said as she started to pack up her things. Then she paused and looked at me with an expression that was hard to understand. "You are a very lucky man, Andy. You have a wonderful wife, lovely kids, and you are very talented. I kind of envy you. You have everything many people wish for." "Oh, I don't think you'd want my life. Your life seems to be going really well," I replied with a smile, trying to lighten my own mood. "You're beautiful, you're single, and your career is thriving. Ted seems really taken with you. It's odd, though. You acted like you were trying to avoid him. Is that your way of keeping the guys interested?" Maria sighed and shook her head. "No, I meet guys like Ted every day. They think they are so special, and I'm sure he could get lots of women easily. But I'm not interested in men like that. Honestly, I want someone I can truly trust. I want someone who will appreciate me for who I am, not because I'm on TV." "Honestly, many people think you have everything you could want," I said with a laugh. Maria smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "Then you and everyone else are mistaken. It gets really tiring when you can't go anywhere without people recognizing you. I meant what I said about disliking fame. I struggle to keep a boyfriend because they often feel overwhelmed by me. Here's a little secret. It can get quite lonely." "I'm really sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. "If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." "You're kind, Andy," Maria said as she gathered her papers, preparing to leave, but then stopped. "If you think your wife wouldn't mind, I could use someone to chat with now and then, someone who isn't looking to use me." "Here is my card," I said, handing Maria my business card. "You can call me any time. Well, preferably during the day, but I'm usually up until midnight and awake by 6 in the morning. If you're really needing to talk, feel free to call any time. I just can't promise I'll make much sense if it's really late." Maria laughed and gave me a friendly gesture. "Thank you. I really appreciate that. By the way, I'm hoping to write a piece about issues in Hollywood. Would you be interested in working on something like that with me?" "I'm open to any writing project," I replied eagerly. "I'll get the rewrites finished so you'll have them first thing in the morning." I grabbed my bag and headed out. I had a lot of writing to do and would likely be up late. I planned to stop by the room and let Cassie know, just so she wouldn't worry when I came in around 3 or 4 in the morning. As I walked by Ted's room, the door opened, and Cassie stepped out. Her makeup was smudged, her hair looked messy, and her dress was slightly askew. My eyes narrowed while Cassie's widened. We locked eyes for what felt like a long time. Finally, Cassie spoke. Nothing happened. I was fearful of losing Cassie to Ted, and seeing the evidence in front of me broke my heart. So many feelings rushed through me in those moments. I felt stuck and unable to move for a little while longer. With a heavy heart, all I could say was, "Just sign the divorce papers and file them." As I turned to leave, Cassie grabbed my arm. Nothing happened. Ted crossed a line and I left. "Andy, we need to talk." I pulled my arm away and quickly walked down the hall. I needed to escape. If I stayed, I wasn't sure what I might say or do to either Cassie or Ted. "Please, Andy, don't walk away," I heard Cassie plead. Nothing happened. When I reached the elevators, one opened and a couple stepped out. I got on and pressed the button for the main floor and the rooftop. I didn't know which way the elevator was going. To my surprise, it was going up. The last thing I saw as the doors closed was Cassie, appearing very pale. I wanted to drink to forget, but I knew I couldn't. I still had to finish my work for Fox. When the elevator doors opened, I noticed the rooftop bar to my right. Before I walked into the Barra de Fantasia, I looked around the roof. It was designed as a recreation space. Besides the bar, there was a nice-sized pool at the edge with railings to keep people safe. The view while swimming must have been amazing. Between the bar and the pool, there was mini golf. They removed the obstacles at night for safety. There were 2 small basketball areas for games, too. The big snack bar on the left was closed for the night, and I couldn't see much else in the dark. Even with what little I saw, it looked impressive, but I didn't have time to enjoy it. I needed to focus on my work, even though my heart felt heavy. I settled at a table in a dim corner and took out my laptop. I noticed Cassie when she entered the bar looking for me, but she couldn't see me. After a bit, she left when she couldn't find me. I stared at my screen for a long time, but couldn't start working. I looked at the bar, hoping a drink might help calm me down. As I sipped my second drink, thoughts about everything I had to do when I got home flooded my mind. I needed to open new bank accounts, remove Cassie from my 401k, find a new place to live, and decide what to take from our big house. Then I thought about finishing this assignment and heading back to the United States. I knew the kids would be sad, but Cassie had made her choice. It was better to clear things up and start fresh. I'd leave after I was sure that Maria had everything she needed from me. After I finished my work, I sent the rewrites to Maria. To my surprise, the bar was empty. I checked my watch and it was 4 in the morning. I didn't want to go back to my room, so I decided to relax on one of the lounges by the pool. Before I did that, I picked up the house phone and called the front desk. I asked them to change my flight tickets. I wasn't sure if they usually did that, but it was listed as one of the services at the Fantasia Hotel. I asked them to book me on the earliest flight, ideally directly to Austin. If that wasn't possible, I was okay with a flight through Houston. Once that was settled, I laid down, not expecting to sleep, but eventually I drifted off. I woke up to my phone buzzing with a message from Maria. It simply said, "Big news! My room 7 a.m. I checked my phone, it was only 6. I had time to go to my room and change, but instead, I decided to use the men's room to freshen up a bit. The rooftop restaurant was open for breakfast, so I got a table and ordered some coffee. When I arrived at Maria's room at 6:45, everyone else was already there. After I took a seat next to Pete, I asked, "What's happening?" He shook his head. "No idea." Maria came in looking very happy. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I have great news. We've been given a chance to interview the President of Mexico. A wave of chatter and questions erupted, which Maria quieted by raising her hands. As you know, the International Association of Police Chiefs is hosting a conference at this hotel. We chose to stay here for that reason. We wanted to interview many chiefs, especially those involved in the drug war. I was just informed that the Mexican president plans to meet with the governing body this morning. I've been trying to secure an interview with him for weeks, and today, they finally said yes. "How long will the president meet with us?" asked Sandra Kaufman, the show's producer. "Only 20 minutes, so we need to make every question count." I was curious why I had been invited to this meeting. While it was great news for the show, it didn't involve me directly. I stood up and walked over to Maria. I waited until she finished talking to Sandra. I just wanted to wish her luck and then leave Mexico City. I needed some time alone to think about my failed marriage. "Andy, thank you for coming," Maria said with a bright smile. "Your rewrites were wonderful. I can see you didn't get much sleep, and I really appreciate your hard work. But I have a favor to ask. I understand this is outside your agreement with Fox, and I can't promise any extra money, but I need you to prepare the questions." I felt surprised and flattered, but also a bit confused. "I thought your team in New York would handle that for you." Maria laughed lightly. "By the time they get to it, the meeting with the president will be done. I like how you focus on what's really important and make it easy to understand. I need at least 30 questions, and I need them really quickly because the interview is at 9. I shrugged and said, "Sure." 50 minutes later, I printed out 42 questions. Maria motioned for me to sit beside her while she looked over my work. It felt a bit unreal to sit next to someone as famous and lovely as Maria. I wouldn't admit it, but I felt a little nervous. To calm myself, I watched the rest of the crew moving around swiftly as they turned the sitting room into a mini studio. Pete and Billy were finishing setting up the camera and sound equipment. The makeup team was getting ready. Sandra was on her cell phone, chatting excitedly with someone. I guessed it was her bosses back in New York. "This is wonderful, Andy," Maria said happily. "I just need some details on a few of the questions. Is that okay?" "Of course," I replied, and we started discussing the questions that needed more explanation. 25 minutes later, we wrapped up, and Maria smiled brightly. "I knew you were the right person for this job." With that, Maria reached over and gave me a friendly hug. "Well, I'll let you get ready for your show," I said, standing up. Maria took my hand. "Don't you want to stay and meet the President of Mexico?" "I would, but I have some family matters to attend to," I explained as I checked my phone for my flight time. "I have a flight at 10:40 something." "Just change your flight to a later time. And how silly of me," Maria said, tapping her forehead. "Please invite your family to come here too. It would be a great opportunity for your kids and your wife to meet the president." I thought about it. If it were just Cassie and me, I would say no. But Maria was right. This was an amazing chance for my kids. It's not every day that you meet the leader of another country. I couldn't hold back Sally and Kevin just because their mother and I were going our separate ways. I would keep it together until after the meeting. Leaving Maria's room, which was a bit chaotic from the upcoming interview, I found the hallway nice and quiet. I called the front desk first and told them to change my ticket. Thankfully, Fox was covering the costs. Then I took a deep breath and called Callie's cell. "Andy?" she answered right away. "Thank goodness you called. Can we sit down and talk?" "Later," I replied quickly. "Something exciting has come up that the kids will love. Maria has an interview with the President of Mexico. She wants us to meet him in her suite. I think this will be a great chance for the kids. You're invited too." "Can we talk afterward?" Cassie asked, sounding anxious. "Of course," I said, even though I knew there wasn't much to discuss. "Thank you. I'll get the kids ready and come right up." Cassie sounded relieved. "What's her room number?" 4915, I replied, then ended the call. Cassie felt a rush of relief when I saw Andy was calling. I whispered a quick thanks. I had been very worried since I learned about his flight back to Austin that morning. The thought of him seeing me with Ted had shaken me deeply. It felt like my whole life was falling apart. I realized how I had acted poorly. I had focused too much on my career and neglected my family, and for what? A small chance to advance in my job. I worried I had affected my marriage and family, All night I tried calling Andy, but either he didn't answer or his phone was off. When I woke up and saw his flight confirmation, I felt a wave of panic. I needed to talk to him. I wanted to share my regrets and reassure him of my love. After Andy's call, I rushed to wake the kids. When I told them they would meet the President of Mexico, they jumped up excitedly. I made sure to mention that their dad set this up through Maria. Sally was overjoyed, and Kevin couldn't stop smiling. As we walked to Maria's suite, I felt a flutter of nerves. I worried that if Maria hadn't invited the kids, Andy might not have come. The hurt on his face from before lingered in my mind. When we got off the elevator, Andy was waiting in the hall, looking like he hadn't slept much. I could tell it was because of the earlier situation. I wanted nothing more than to approach him and seek his understanding. But I knew I had made a mess of things, and I was afraid I couldn't fix it. I had to try anyway. Andy nodded at me and hugged the kids. "Come on in." The president hasn't arrived yet, and they're still preparing for the interview. The room was busy and lively. The Fox team was making last-minute adjustments, and Maria's makeup artist was finishing up her look. Suddenly, 2 security guards came in and stood by the door. Andy led us to a corner to stay out of the way. When Maria finished her makeup, she walked over to us with a warm smile. She seemed genuinely happy to see the kids and me. "I'm so glad you could come," she said, giving each of us a friendly hug. I noticed she hugged Andy a moment longer, but I brushed that thought aside. I didn't want any uncertainty to impact my chance to mend things with my husband. I felt foolish for being selfish. As I watched the broadcast crew at work, I realized how important Andy was to this project. I felt bad for my previous thoughts about his career and how I had underestimated him. My dad would have been disappointed in me. He believed that everyone who worked hard deserved respect, no matter their job. He treated his brother, a garbage man, with the same respect as a CEO. I noticed Andy's expression as he observed everything happening around him. He looked genuinely excited. Kevin was eager to chat with Pete and Billy, and Sally was full of joy. Maria came over twice, once to ask about a part of the script Andy prepared, and then again for details on a spreadsheet from the network. Andy's replies were short, but they seemed to make Maria happy. Then the door opened, and a tall man walked in wearing a business suit. He had dark hair and eyes, with a serious expression that suggested he was in charge of security for the president. "My name is Captain Lopez," he announced, and the room quieted down. "The president will arrive shortly. He has a very tight schedule, so please be ready. He'll have 20 minutes for the interview before we leave." A minute later, the door opened again, and another man entered with more guards. He was shorter and had dark hair, but his eyes were a soft blue. He had a charming smile that lit up the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Lopez said formally, "it is my honor to present the President of Mexico, Carlos Miguel Sanchez." Everyone in the room started to clap, and it felt right to do so. The president looked a bit shy. "Please, please," he said, raising his hands. "No formalities are needed. I feel honored to be here and grateful for the chance to speak to millions about our fight against the drug cartels." Maria was at the president's side before he even finished speaking. "Thank you, President, for agreeing to this interview," Maria said with a bright smile. The president smiled back and graciously acknowledged her. "Miss Shivers, I should thank you. I hope this interview will get your Congress interested in helping us with our efforts. Mr. President, if you don't mind, I'd like to introduce you to the people who helped make this happen." "Of course, Miss Shivers." Maria then started introducing her team to the president. He made each person feel important with kind words. I watched him greet Sally and Kevin, and it was clear they were excited about meeting him. After chatting with my children, President Sanchez turned to me with a warm smile. "Ah, Mrs. Spencer, your husband is very lucky. You are a wonderful woman with lovely children." Even though I knew he was a skilled politician, I still felt a bit shy. When he turned to Andy, I was surprised to see the president's eyes light up. "Mr. Spencer, I really admire the work you've done on this show. Miss Shivers shared many details with my office. You impressed some of my closest advisors with how clearly you presented our issues. Your work will be very useful to us." I was surprised to see Andy blush, as he rarely showed any color in his cheeks. He was humble in his response. Most of the work was done by Miss Shivers' team. I just helped organize the information a bit. No, you did much more than that, Mr. Spencer, and I appreciate it. Once the introductions were finished, Andy began to guide us out of the room, but I heard Maria ask him to wait for a moment. Andy, when the president sat down to start the interview, I knew it was time for my family and me to leave. I began to lead Cassie and the kids to the door. Just as we were about to leave, Maria called me over. Andy, could you stay back for a minute? I nodded and opened the door for my family. Once it was closed, I turned to Maria. Andy, I have another favor to ask, she said with a smile. I know you've completed your work, but could you wait in the hall until the interview is over, just in case any questions come up that you might help answer? Of course, I replied, and stepped into the hallway. Most people had already left, leaving only my family, Maria's makeup artist, Captain Lopez, and a few security guards. They were all on alert, with some carrying large bags. I went to my family and noticed Cassie had a serious look on her face, along with a hint of concern. I knew she wanted to discuss what happened the previous night and my job. I wanted to finish this quickly, but I needed to make sure our talk wouldn't be interrupted. Can we go somewhere to talk as a family? Cassie asked. It was clear that Cassie needed to talk, but I was surprised she wanted to discuss it with the kids around. I worried she might want to use the kids to communicate her thoughts on Ted. The thought made me uneasy, but I didn't want to make a scene, especially in front of the children. I can't go right now, I replied. Maria asked me to stay until the interview is done, just in case they have questions. It should take about 20 minutes. Why don't you and the kids go back to the room? I'll call you when I'm finished. Cassie shook her head. We'll wait for you. That will be boring for the kids, I said calmly. How about you let them do something else for a while? If it's okay with you, Dad, Kevin quickly said. I'd like to stay. Maybe I can help Pete and Billy with their stuff? I want to stay too, Sally said right after Kevin. Maybe I can talk to Miss Shivers or the president. We're all staying, Cassie said firmly. I didn't like this at all. I wasn't going to be swayed by my kids or anyone else regarding Cassie's growing bond with Ted. I had an uneasy feeling about her and Ted, and the events of the previous night made me think my concerns were valid. It was too much to process. I stepped away from them and leaned against the wall near the door, feeling frustrated when I suddenly heard Captain Lopez's radio crackle. Whatever was said changed the captain's attitude, and he began giving quick orders back into his radio. Whoa! The captain exclaimed and hurried inside Maria's suite. Even though I didn't understand Spanish, I could tell that was something serious. I followed him inside. Mr. President, we have to go, he said in English, grabbing the president's arm. There are dangerous people in the hotel. For the past 6 months, my life had felt like it was falling apart. Cassie seemed more and more drawn to her boss, Ted Walker. I was worried he might try to win her over. Ted was the type of guy who used people and then turned away. Years ago, when I supervised him, I had to write him up for his careless work. It didn't hurt his career, but in his eyes, I had stained his name, and I was sure he was plotting revenge by trying to ruin my marriage. These last months had worsened the situation between Cassie and me. I hoped that our vacation in Mexico City with the kids would help bring us closer again. In the last day, my life took a turn for the worse. Cassie gave me a choice: leave my writing job and go back to accounting, or she would leave me. I suspected Ted was behind this, trying to mess with my life. I wasn't sure if my wife was involved with Ted, but last night I saw her leave his hotel room looking somewhat out of sorts. If that wasn't bad enough, things got even more serious. Now, I found myself on the 49th floor of a hotel with the President of Mexico while armed men were looking for him. I feared that if they found the president, they wouldn't spare anyone else nearby. I glanced at Captain Lopez, the head of security, hoping for some reassurance. Just then, his radio buzzed with urgent Spanish. I could hear gunshots in the distance. The captain translated for us. There are many armed men in the hotel. They want to harm the president. My team is fighting back, but they are outnumbered. Mr. President, we need to act quickly. Almost immediately, the fire alarms blared. The captain scanned the room. He explained, "The fire alarms will stop the elevators. They will only go to the ground floor and lock down." The president spoke quietly with his chief of security. After a moment, he addressed everyone. "The armed men want to capture or harm me, but as the captain said, they won't hesitate to hurt anyone who helps me. We need to get to the roof. Captain Lopez has arranged for a helicopter to pick us up there. Please stay calm and follow my security guard." "We still have time," the captain reassured us. "Since the elevators are out of order, they will have to climb the stairs, which is nearly 50 floors." People in the suite began to leave, following the guard toward the stairwell to the roof. Captain Lopez's radio crackled again, then his phone rang. The voice on the other end sounded excited, and I could hear more gunfire. The captain spoke calmly into the radio, probably giving orders. Then he spoke on his cell phone, and I could tell from his expression that the conversation was troubling. He quickly turned to the president and explained something softly. The president looked serious and asked in English, "What's happening out there? Please, speak in English so everyone can understand. I regret putting these people in danger. They have a right to know what's happening." "The police are surrounding the hotel right now," Lopez replied right away. "Army units are on their way, but it will take them at least 20 minutes to arrive. Still, I believe the helicopter will get here before the threat can reach this floor." The president frowned. "Make sure a second helicopter is ready to pick up anyone we can't take with the first one," he said, patting his security chief on the shoulder. "You're doing a great job, Captain, given the situation." The president then turned and followed the others toward the stairway. Cassie and the kids had been standing a bit away from us. They had only caught snippets of the conversation. When the president moved on with 2 other security agents, Cassie came over to me. "Andy, what's going on?" Her face was full of worry. "The cartels are trying to hurt the president," I explained quickly. "We need to get to the roof. They're sending a helicopter for us." I could see that my children looked just as concerned as their mother. No matter what was going on in my relationship with Cassie, my main concern was to protect my family, including her. It felt like a natural instinct. It's what husbands and fathers are meant to do. We started moving with the others when Captain Lopez called out to me, "Mr. Spencer, could you stay back for a moment?" He asked the same of Peter and Billy. The worry etched on Cassie and the kids' faces tightened my heart. "You all go ahead," I said gently. "I'll catch up." The concern on Cassie's face surprised me. I wasn't expecting her to look so troubled, especially since she had lost respect for me and planned to move on with her boss. But it didn't matter. I would do everything I could to keep her and my kids safe. Once they were okay, we could go our separate ways. I made sure Cassie and the kids followed the others to the stairs and then turned to Captain Lopez. He pointed to the floor plan on the wall. Each hotel has these plans on every floor. They show where the exits are in case of a fire or, in our case, a threat. "Have any of you ever used a gun?" the captain asked. I didn't like the sound of that. It meant he was ready for a confrontation, and we already knew we were outnumbered. Billy shook his head right away. "No, I don't like guns." Pete nodded. "I've used a small rifle and a target pistol." When the captain looked at me, I nodded too. "I belong to a shooting club. I've got 2 9mm handguns, a 9mm carbine, and an AR-15. "Mr. Taggart," the captain signaled, "you go up to the roof with the others." Billy didn't hesitate and started to jog away. "I'm not completely clear on everything happening," the captain said, "but it's a serious situation." Before he could elaborate, his cell phone rang. After answering, he spoke quickly in Spanish. "Was that bad news?" I asked. The captain nodded. "The president's helicopter has a mechanical issue. I told the pilot to take another helicopter if needed. It may take longer than I thought. We might need to defend ourselves. And there's more. There are more cartel members in the hotel than I realized. About 40 or more of them used the elevators before they were shut down, and they're now on the 25th floor. At least they don't know where the president is yet, so they'll have to search floor by floor, giving us some time. However, this attack seems carefully planned. They have about 30 or 40 more members on the ground level, and they've set up blockades to stop us. I've also learned they've sent others throughout the city, causing chaos to slow down the police and military response." "What do you want us to do?" I asked. "I've told my men on the ground floor to move to the 20th floor and hold off any attackers. The rest of my team is meeting us here," the captain said, pointing to a map. "There are only 2 staircases leading to the roof, and we need to defend them. If needed, we can fall back to the doorways opening onto the roof. It's essential to delay the attackers until help arrives." I knew the captain was focused on protecting the president, but I couldn't shake the fear of what would happen if the cartel reached the roof. They could cause distress for everyone there, including my family. My concern for my wife and kids overwhelmed me. I knew I would do anything to keep them safe. Captain Lopez lifted his radio and spoke quickly in Spanish again. Turning back to Peter and me, he said, "My men on the ground are ready. The others are coming up to join us. We have some time, but we need to create barriers on the stairs to slow them down." The captain instructed us to start moving furniture down the stairwell. He wanted to make it hard for the attackers to reach us. Then, he told us to build a blockade on the landing just below the last stairs to the roof. We began with the room next door, which was still open. Meanwhile, the captain hurried to unlock several other rooms with a master key. Captain Lopez then left with 3 of his men to check the other stairway. In the next 10 minutes, we cleared out most of the furniture from Maria's suite and 3 other rooms. We carried, pushed, and pulled everything we could before stacking it on the stairway. It wouldn't completely stop the intruders, but we hoped it would slow them down. Just after I tossed a chair over the railing, 5 men appeared. I quickly grabbed a nearby security agent's gun, but he stopped me. "No," he said in English. "Good guys." I watched as the 5 men clambered over the piles of furniture we'd thrown down. To my surprise, they managed to get through with little trouble. I lost track of how many security agents Captain Lopez had with us, but I felt better seeing that they had various guns. One of the men had a hurt arm, and his shirt was ripped, revealing that he was wearing a protective vest. Captain Lopez returned just after the last man reached the top of the stairs. He spoke quickly in Spanish, but I caught the names Peter and Andy. I figured he was identifying us, although he didn't introduce us to his men. "Andy, Peter, I'm leaving 3 of my men here. I want you to keep throwing furniture down the stairs and set up a barricade," he told us. He sent 2 other men to check the other stairway and opened several more rooms for us. Fueled by urgency, the 6 of us moved almost 2 more rooms of furniture onto the stairs. Still, I worried about how long that would hold off the gunmen, but we had to focus on building a barricade. I wasn't sure what could stop the bullets we might face, but one of the Mexican security men had a plan. He instructed us to grab some mattresses and drag them to the landing. Then, he began breaking apart the desks in the rooms. I joined him while Peter and the other security guys worked to remove as many wires from the lamps as they could. Once we gathered everything, we stood the mattresses on their sides with the desks in between. We used electrical wire to tie them together to make sure our barrier wouldn't fall over. It wasn't perfect, but it offered some protection, depending on the kind of bullets the attackers might use. Just after we finished, Captain Lopez returned, ready to help defend this stairway. He handed me an assault rifle and gave Peter a pistol. Peter shrugged, unsure how to use it. The captain took the weapon from him and showed him the basics, how to remove the magazine, put in a new one, load a bullet, and turn off the safety. Then he looked at me. "Any questions?" The rifle I had been given was similar to the one used by the United States military. It was not much different from my own. I pressed the button to remove the magazine and pulled back the slide to take out the bullet that was already loaded. I put the bullet back in the magazine, pushed it back in, and loaded another bullet. Then I pointed at a small switch on the side. "This switch changes it from semi-auto to automatic," I explained. The captain nodded and handed me 4 more magazines, then gave Pete 3 extra ones for his handgun. "Peter, Andy," he said seriously, "if you feel unsure about this, it's okay to go to the roof. You can defend from up there." "No way am I leaving," Peter replied right away as he took out his phone. "I'm going to record everything. This is going to be incredible footage." The captain smiled at me. "I'm not going anywhere unless I have to," I said confidently. "I want to protect my family no matter what." "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," the captain replied, making the sign of the cross. 10 minutes later, we heard movement below. "They're being very careful," Captain Lopez said, almost to himself. "They know they'll eventually meet the president's security. That helps us." I saw the first person appear, then quickly duck back down. I could hear them speaking in Spanish, discussing how to reach us. I then heard gunfire from another stairway, which worried me. If they got through there and I was down here, my family would be in serious trouble. I had to trust that Captain Lopez would keep us safe. As if sensing my concern, the captain said, I have all the civilians off to the side, and 3 more security officers are watching over the president. When another person peeked up, he didn't pull back fast enough. That was a mistake. Captain Lopez shot and the man fell. Then we heard gunfire from below that echoed towards us. I hadn't expected that. We had to drop to the floor. Using the cover, another person jumped out and hid behind a couch we had pushed down for protection. Before we knew it, he tossed something our way. "Bomb!" Captain Lopez shouted. "Down!" I fell flat on my stomach and let go of the rifle. Covering my ears and pressing my lips together, I braced for the noise. The explosion knocked our mattresses towards us at an angle. Most of the force from the blast had been absorbed by our makeshift wall. Captain Lopez and the other guards jumped to their feet in an instant, shooting at the attackers below. Their shots mainly hit the couch. I came up a moment later and started shooting too. Peter was lying on the floor, dazed by the explosion. A quick look showed me blood was coming from his ears. I wasn't sure if we had hit anything, but we had definitely made them think twice. During a lull, I checked on Peter. He was sitting up but still looked a bit confused. Captain Lopez leaned down and asked, "Can you hear me?" Pete nodded. "How many fingers am I holding up?" "Finger," Pete replied with a grin. "What are fingers?" "He's fine," the captain said with a smile. "They're coming again!" shouted another guard. I saw 5 attackers rush forward and take cover behind the furniture while their friends shot at us from below. As I crouched down, I realized that moving the furniture may not have been a great idea. When the attackers paused for a moment, the guards and the captain began firing back. I heard some of them shout in pain. Maybe the furniture was a good idea after all. It gave the attackers a false sense of safety, but now they were finding out it wasn't as strong as they thought. Another grenade flew toward us. At first, I didn't think it caused much trouble, but when I looked over, one of the guards was on the ground, injured. The captain crawled over to try to help him, but it was too late. I took a quick look beyond our barricade and saw that the concrete wall had several large chunks missing. We exchanged fire for a few more minutes. I was now halfway through my 3rd magazine. The only thing that kept me calm was the sound of the ongoing battle from the other staircase. I knew that this fight was one we couldn't win. If the helicopter didn't arrive soon, we were in serious trouble. More and more attackers were closing in, and bullets were beginning to pierce our makeshift cover. It wouldn't be long before we would have to abandon our position and try to move toward the doorway. I had started the day knowing my marriage was ending, but I never thought it would also be the day I faced death. Strangely, the thought of dying didn't scare me as much as the thought of my family. I was worried about them, especially Cassie's safety. A sad realization hit me hard. If they escaped and I didn't, I wouldn't be there to see my kids grow up. I wouldn't witness their graduations or weddings, and I wouldn't get to know my future grandchildren. Tears began to roll down my face. After several minutes of silence, I quickly glanced up. I saw something metal being thrown to a man hiding behind 2 stacked chairs. I think my expression caught Captain Lopez's attention. He looked up and noticed the man point the metal tube and then yelled, "Rocket!" The rocket hit the stairs 5 steps below us. The blast pushed our makeshift barrier back 2 feet, but somehow it held strong. A security agent shot the man who fired the rocket, and the rest of his group retreated down the stairs to regroup. "Wow!" I exclaimed, feeling overwhelmed. I slid down against the wall. As I tried to gather my thoughts, I felt nauseous. The blast had shaken me badly. Then I looked down and noticed that my shirt, which was white, was now turning red. I was hurt. At first, I wasn't sure where the injury was coming from, but a sharp pain in my forehead made me check there. When I touched my hairline, my hand came away stained. This sight made me feel queasy, and I gagged, but nothing came up. As I steadied myself, I gently felt my forehead and found a deep cut across it. It was bleeding a lot, and it hurt quite a bit. Somewhere in my mind, I recalled that head wounds often bleed a lot but are rarely serious. This thought helped ease my worry a bit. I tore a piece from my shirt and pressed it against the cut. The bleeding slowed a lot. Then I quickly checked the rest of my body. Everything seemed fine until I looked at my left leg. My pants were torn just above the knee and there was some blood seeping out. It took more effort to tear the fabric from my leg, but once I did, I saw that the injury wasn't too bad. I quickly tore off 2 larger pieces of my shirt. I wrapped one around my head and the other around my leg. My head throbbed and my leg hurt too. After checking my injuries, I figured they weren't serious. This reminded me of something I had always believed, that each of us has a time to go. Maybe this wasn't my time just yet, but I felt a sense of foreboding. Once I'd taken care of my first aid, I looked around. I saw that a piece of concrete had hit Peter's arm. Blood was trickling down onto his pants. Captain Lopez crawled over to him and did his best to wrap up the injured arm. Moments later, the attackers came at us again. We exchanged fire for what felt like ages. Suddenly, another member of their group lifted an RPG and aimed it. Just as he was about to shoot, the captain shot him, and the man fell back. In the chaos, the rocket went straight up instead of towards us. It crashed into the ceiling, sending big pieces of concrete falling onto the cartel members below. After a moment of quiet, Captain Lopez got up and looked at the chaos around us. For a brief moment, I thought we might have stopped the cartel fighters. Then I heard voices and more men moving into position. Pete was having a hard time standing, and I could feel the blood on me. This was not good. Of our original 6, 2 were gone, and the rest of us had different injuries. We were running out of time. Soon, we could all be gone. Just as that thought crossed my mind, I heard a helicopter getting closer. The fight in the other stairway was still strong, so Captain Lopez told us we needed to leave our spot and go to the roof. He didn't have to repeat himself. Before we moved, though, I took 2 clips from one of the fallen guards. I helped Pete get up. He had many small cuts on his face, but his arm was bleeding less than before. As I tried to guide him to the stairway, he pulled away and ran back to the railing. He quickly grabbed his cell phone, which had been taped there, and put it in his pocket. Once on the roof, I saw the president with 3 bodyguards around him, ready for anything. At least 20 guests were huddled nearby. I didn't count them all. I quickly spotted Cassie and my kids, but my heart sank when I saw Ted standing in a corner with chairs piled around him. If he thought that was a good hiding place, he was mistaken. He was wearing a bathing suit and a tank top. It was clear that the situation was making him uneasy. Cassie and the kids saw me and rushed over. "Andy, you're hurt," Cassie said, her voice shaking. "It looks worse than it is," I said, trying to comfort them. But with all the blood on me, my words didn't help. Sally was crying, but Cassie had the sense to grab a towel and gently wipe my face. For a moment, I forgot everything else. Captain Lopez signaled for 2 of the men with the president to follow him, while the other guards stayed back. I quickly picked up my gun and went with them. "Andy, no!" I heard Cassie shout. "Stay with us!" "I have to go," I said as I kissed her on the cheek. "It'll be okay." I felt a strong ache in my heart as I realized it might be the last time I would see the woman I loved. Either I would be gone or she might choose to be with Ted. At that moment, I thought maybe being away was better for me. When I got to the other stairwell, I was taken aback. About a dozen cartel members were heading up the stairs. Only one of Captain Lopez's men was still alive. Right away, Captain Lopez and the 3 men with him began to shoot. At least 4 cartel members fell right away, but, sadly, 2 of the security officers were also hit in the exchange. I switched my gun to automatic mode and got ready. I knew that it would make the gun jump a bit, but I kept my aim steady. I saw 4 men fall down. The others quickly ran back down the stairs. I changed the magazine and fired after them. During that brief moment, I removed the empty magazine and put in my last one. I hurried to hide behind a wall. For a few minutes, we exchanged fire as the sound of a helicopter grew louder. I could hear more commotion below. At first, I wasn't sure what was happening until I saw the captain smiling. It seemed like help had arrived. "Andy," the captain said, looking at me. "Get to the roof. Send for my other men here. Get your family on the helicopter. We'll hold them off until our team secures the stairs." "Are you sure?" I asked. "Absolutely. You've done enough. Now go take care of your family." When I burst onto the roof, the helicopter was just starting to land. I ran to the security guard and asked him to help at the stairs. Moments later, the helicopter's door opened, and a man inside waved for people to get on. Ted rushed ahead and jumped in. I ran to my family, and Cassie hugged me tightly, crying, "I'm so glad you're okay." As the president led others to the helicopter, I stayed close to my family. I made sure they were securely seated in the middle next to Maria. Then I took my place by the door between Peter and Billy. Peter looked weak, but surprisingly, Billy looked even worse. Once everyone was on board, the helicopter tried to take off but couldn't. The pilot tried several times but failed. Finally, he called out, Too heavy. He says we're too heavy, an older man next to the door translated. The president got up and made his way to the door, stepping back onto the roof. Since I was next to the door, I nudged Billy. Come on, let's get off. I didn't say anything to Peter because he looked hurt and confused. As I jumped off the helicopter, I heard Cassie shout, "No, Andy, you're hurt!" After a moment, 2 other older men also exited the helicopter, but it still wouldn't lift off. Peter climbed down next, but it still wasn't enough weight. Ted was last, but he backed away and shook his head. "I'm not getting off," he said firmly. Just then, a loud noise erupted as something hit near the helicopter. There was a shooter on the roof of the building next door. Another hit the side of the helicopter, but thankfully it didn't cause any serious damage or hurt anyone. We quickly tried to find cover, but I realized that if the helicopter didn't lift off soon, it wouldn't be able to. Yet Ted stood his ground. Suddenly, Captain Lopez appeared, carrying a rifle with a scope. He quickly started shooting at the person on the other building. This got the sniper's attention. The rest of us who had just got off the helicopter began to run. I pointed to the wall where the president was sheltering. Billy, Peter, and I headed that way, but I couldn't move fast because of my hurt leg. I tried to run, but it ended up being more of a limping jog. I had only taken a few steps when I felt a sharp pain in my side. I stumbled and fell. As I fell, everything seemed to slow down. I saw the green turf coming up to meet me. Then I heard Cassie's cry, "God, Andy, no!" After that, I heard Sally calling out, "Daddy, Daddy!" I struggled to sit up, and when I touched my side, my hand came away covered in blood. I looked at the helicopter and saw my wife and kids looking scared. Moments later, the elderly translator struggled to the roof. The helicopter took off without delay, banking sharply before dropping out of sight. I could feel myself slipping away. My last thought was that my family was safe before everything went dark. Cassie as. We waited in the hallway for the interview to end. Andy seemed distant and kept his distance from me. Whenever I tried to talk to him, he just shook his head and said, "Later." I repeatedly prayed, "Please, God, let him believe me." Andy paced back and forth, glancing at the suite's door. I wished the interview would end so we could finally talk. Then the captain's radio crackled to life. Captain Lopez looked very upset by what he learned. He quickly rushed into Maria's suite. Andy followed the captain inside. I sensed something was very wrong, but I didn't fully grasp what they were discussing. I heard something about danger in the hotel, and suddenly I felt very anxious. I pulled my children close and waited. I was trying to stay composed, but I was worried. I felt a little better when I looked at Andy and saw he was calm, too. There was some concern on his face, but he seemed steady. Then the president asked us to follow his security guard to the roof. But when the captain said he wanted Andy to stay back, I started to feel uneasy again. "Andy, please stay with us," I begged. "It's okay," he replied. "I'll be there soon." But he didn't come. Sally was upset, and I held her while tears streamed down my face. Kevin kept asking if his dad would be all right. I told him everything would be fine, but I knew he didn't believe me. Maria was so kind. She stayed close to the children, comforting them that everything would be okay. President Sanchez kept assuring everyone that his team would take care of things, but I could see the worry on his face. His 3 bodyguards had lined everyone up against a wall. They took their positions, ready and alert. All we could do was wait. When the loud noises began and Andy still hadn't shown up, I couldn't hold back my tears. Maria wrapped her arms around me, also crying softly. I felt deep down that Andy was in danger. The thought of him getting hurt made my heart ache, and I was scared he might think I had betrayed him. How foolish I had been. The loud noises came more often from both staircases. Then there was a loud bang, followed by silence. Sally started crying, and Kevin moved toward the stairs where his dad was, but Maria quickly pulled him back. Another loud bang broke the quiet, and the noises started again from both sides. Even though I was terrified, the sounds gave me a bit of comfort. It meant that the people with Andy were still holding on. I held on to that small hope like a lifeline. The tension felt endless. But my heart lifted when I heard the sound of a helicopter coming closer. However, my relief faded when I heard another loud bang, followed shortly by more noises from both sides. An explosion seemed to shake the area above the stairs where Andy was. It felt like my heart stopped, and I struggled to breathe. Finally, I saw Andy come out with Peter, one of the security guards, and Captain Lopez. I was shocked to see that Andy had some marks on him. The kids and I rushed to him, and I held him tightly. "Andy, you're hurt," I said, holding on to him. He hugged me back and replied, "It looks worse than it actually is." I wiped his face with a small towel and held him close. We stayed like that until Andy spotted Captain Lopez and his team moving toward the staircase where the noise was still going on. Andy started to walk away. "Andy, no!" I begged. "Please stay with us." "I have to go," he said, giving me a gentle touch on the cheek. "It'll be okay." When Andy walked through the doorway and the noise began again, my legs gave way. I was sobbing hard. The thought of losing Andy felt like a sharp pain in my chest. I felt ashamed of myself. I prayed for his safety, wishing to make things right. How could I have been so wrong to compare Andy to Ted? With my kids close to me, I looked at Ted. The man I once admired was now trembling in the corner. When we first got to the roof, he was acting tough as usual. But as he began to understand how serious things were, he started to complain loudly that the officials weren't doing enough. He even shouted at the president, asking him to take action. The president's guards told him to step back. He moved away to sulk until the chaos began. Then he tried to hide himself, awkwardly stacking lawn chairs around him. It was clear he was scared, and I felt really disappointed in him. As the helicopter landed, I kept my eyes on the doorway. My heart raced. Where was Andy? We couldn't leave without him. At last, I saw Andy come out, and I rushed to him. Just then, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned to see Ted break free from behind his lawn chairs and dash toward the helicopter. He outpaced everyone, and even though the crew member at the door signaled for him to stop, Ted hurried past him. The rest of the group kept moving in an orderly fashion, following the president. I held on to Andy tightly, but he urged us to move faster and nudged us forward. I could feel him behind me, but I kept looking back to make sure he was still there. The helicopter blades spun quickly as people climbed aboard. The president stood at the side, helping many get in. Andy assisted Sally and Maria before helping me up while Kevin climbed in on his own. Andy directed us to sit next to Maria while he took a seat in the doorway between Billy and Peter. When everyone was on board, the pilot tried to take off, but we remained still. He tried 3 times, and still, we didn't move. "Too much weight!" the pilot shouted over the noise of the engine. An older man said, "The helicopter can't lift off because it's too heavy." President Sanchez sighed, stood up, and got off the helicopter. But even then, the pilot couldn't get it to rise. I watched as the president ran to the wall for protection. I saw Andy give a small nudge to Billy, and both of them leaped off. "Andy, no, you're hurt!" I yelled. But he just turned back to me and smiled gently. In that moment, I realized how much I truly cared for him. A moment later, 2 more older men got off, followed by Peter. Still, the helicopter couldn't take off. Everyone turned to Ted, but he shook his head. Then one of the women said something to him. "I'm not getting off," he replied firmly. Suddenly, a noise alarmed the men who had just exited the helicopter, and then something thumped hard against the side of the chopper. It dawned on me someone was targeting us. People inside the helicopter began to shout. I saw Andy run with the other men to find shelter, but he had only taken a few steps when he suddenly lost his balance and fell. I shouted, "Oh no, Andy!" I heard Sally calling out, "Daddy! Daddy!" At that moment, an older man carefully stepped onto the roof. The helicopter began to lift off unexpectedly. Andy sat up, looking confused. He touched his side and found his hand covered in blood. Then the helicopter turned sharply and dipped below the top of the building. As we sped away, I could see Army helicopters flying in the opposite direction, but I was too upset to focus on anything. I sobbed uncontrollably, holding Sally and Kevin tightly, who were crying too. The helicopter landed on an Army base, and we were led into what seemed like a small waiting area. The men who helped us had no information about the people we had left behind. They only knew that the struggle to reclaim the Fantasia Hotel was still ongoing. About half an hour later, a bus arrived and we were taken to a big police station. There, we were all separated and asked questions, but no one had any updates. I felt frantic and started to get worried, but the men questioning me were patient and didn't have answers. In the end, I pulled out my cell phone and called my office. I was quickly connected to Mr. Bracken. "Cassie, are you okay?" he asked when he answered. "We're all watching the news here at the office." "Yes, Mr. Bracken," I replied, "and as far as I know, everyone on our team is all right. But Andy was still on the roof of the hotel, and he was hurt." Then I started to cry again. "The authorities won't tell me anything. I don't know if Andy is safe." "Cassie," Mr. Bracken said firmly, "I'll make some calls. As soon as I find out anything, I will call you back." I sat down and let out more tears than I ever thought I could. After a few minutes, the men questioning me decided I needed a break and left. A little while later, Kevin and Sally were brought into the room. We gathered close together, and I tried to be strong, but my heart felt heavy. I had never been this sad in my life. About 15 minutes later, my phone rang. I saw it was Mr. Bracken. "Mr. Bracken, did you find out anything?" I asked quickly. "I don't know much yet, Cassie," he said gently. "However, I did learn that your husband has been taken to a hospital. I arranged for a car to pick you and the kids up. It will take you to where your husband is." "Thank you," I said, feeling grateful. "Cassie," Mr. Bracken said before ending the call, "we're all thinking of you here." I mumbled another thank you and waited. Sally had been crying almost the entire helicopter ride, and even since then. Just when it seemed she might settle down, her shoulders would start to shake as she sobbed again. I was overwhelmed and unsure how long I could stay strong for my children. But the one who really concerned me was Kevin. During the flight, he had cried briefly, but then he had gone mostly quiet. When I tried to talk to him, he only replied with a word or two and then walked off. About 30 minutes after I finished my call with Mr. Bracken, a car arrived and the police let us go. The driver didn't speak any English, so the ride to the hospital was silent, except for Sally's quiet sobs. The hospital was chaotic. Many people from the attack at the Hotel Fantasia were being taken there. It took a long time, at least 15 minutes, to find someone who could speak English. Finally, we were shown to a waiting room on the surgical floor. But still, no one told me anything. Waiting was hard. Every time the door opened, my heart raced, and I jumped to my feet, only to feel disappointment when it was just new visitors. After almost 3 hours, a surgeon came out, still in his scrubs. "Mrs. Spencer?" the doctor asked with a strong accent. "Yes," I said, standing up quickly. "How is my husband?" "Let's go to the conference room over here," he said, pointing to a small room with a table and chairs. I left my children waiting outside and followed the doctor. Once we sat down, I asked again, "Is my husband going to be okay?" "I can't say for sure," the doctor said seriously. "His injuries are severe and he has lost a lot of blood. Even if he survives, we're not sure if there will be any effects on his brain. There was a piece of a bullet near his spine that we managed to remove, but we don't know if he will have any lasting problems." Tears filled my eyes. "He is going to live, isn't he?" The doctor shrugged. "We'll know more in 24 hours. Right now, we can only wait and keep an eye on him. He's in the hands of fate at the moment." "Can I see him?" I asked through my tears. "He's unconscious right now, but if you come with me, you can see him for a few minutes." After letting the children know I was going to see their father and asking them to wait, I followed the doctor. My legs felt weak when I entered the intensive care unit. Andy lay there with IVs in both arms, a tube down his throat, and machines all around him. He looked so pale and fragile. I felt terrible for the way I had treated him. My heart was heavy. I tried to reassure the kids that their father was resting. Kevin's eyes brightened, and he insisted on seeing him. He got upset when I told him I was the only one allowed in. Kevin said it wasn't fair because I didn't express much fondness for his father. That stung almost as much as the fear of losing Andy. I broke down in tears. Kevin muttered that he was sorry and moved to the other side of the waiting room. As the hours went by, I kept thinking about what my son had said. It hurt me to realize how much my feelings for their father showed. If something happened to Andy, I couldn't imagine how I would mend things with my kids. Around 2 in the morning, I finally fell asleep. I wasn't sure how long I was out, but I woke up to someone gently shaking my shoulder. It was the doctor. My heart sank. "Mrs. Spencer, your husband is having serious problems. We need to take him back for surgery. He's very weak. I'm not sure if he can handle it." I found myself in my parents' front yard. They were sitting on the porch, smiling at me. This was strange because they had passed away years ago. I felt so tired and the scene looked peaceful. I tried to go up the porch steps. My father shook his head and pointed to the street, saying, "It's not your time." Suddenly, everything faded away. I opened my eyes slowly and felt like I couldn't breathe. I started to panic, trying to clear my throat. An alarm rang and a nurse rushed over to one of my IVs. I saw her use a syringe on the tubing. Moments later, I fell asleep again. When I woke up next, it was night, but at least I could breathe better. Whatever had been bothering my throat was gone, though it felt sore now. I ached all over, my face, arms, chest, legs, and throat. I sensed someone holding my hand, but I couldn't see properly. I could tell it was a woman. I managed to croak out, "Hurt." I didn't know if she understood, but my sweating and grimaces surely showed my pain. She left, and soon a nurse came in. After she gave me a shot, I closed my eyes again, unsure how long I slept. When I woke for the third time, I felt my bed moving. Then everything went dark again. "Mr. Spencer, Mr. Spencer?" I heard a voice and felt someone shaking me. It felt like I was underwater, struggling to reach the surface. Finally, I opened my eyes and groaned. "Mr. Spencer," the voice said, "it's time for you to wake up." I managed to stay awake for about 10 minutes before drifting off again. They kept waking me up and asking questions. At first, I didn't understand them, and talking was hard. Eventually, I cleared my head enough to speak, though it was difficult. When they woke me up again, they started to test my legs and feet. They wanted to see if I had any numbness. I didn't. Every poke felt sharp. The next day, I realized they wanted to check how I was thinking. It was hard to stay awake. In the last 3 days, I had probably been awake for just about an hour. This time, the doctor started by asking my name and birth date. Then he went through some basic questions like who the President of the United States was and some other simple things. But when he asked me my wife's name, everything came rushing back. I remembered our trip to Mexico City, the Fox assignment, Maria Shivers, the men from the cartel, and Ted Walker. "I must say, you are recovering faster than I expected," the doctor told me. "You've been in a coma for 10 days. I lay in my bed, thinking about everything I could remember. Then it hit me. I had no idea what had happened to my family. I was worried that my marriage was over and that Cassie was leaving me. "Is my family okay?" I asked, tears coming down my face. "Oh yes, they're all fine," the doctor said with a reassuring smile. "You'll see them soon." I couldn't believe that Cassie and the kids were still here. I thought Cassie had to get back to work and the kids to school. Maybe I misunderstood and the doctor was talking about when I would go home. "It might seem like I'm rushing things, but we think patients feel better the sooner they get out of bed. I'm going to have the nurses help you get up today. You need to start moving again. Your leg might hurt a little, and if necessary, we'll get you crutches or a walker." About an hour later, I threw the remote aside in frustration. The TV seemed broken, or maybe it was the remote. I thought I would need to ask someone to fix it. But then all my thoughts about watching TV disappeared when Kevin and Sally burst into the room. "Daddy!" Sally shouted as she ran to me and hugged me tightly. Kevin didn't express himself as much, but I could see he was trying to hold back tears as he finally hugged me, too. Over Kevin's shoulder, I noticed Cassie standing there, looking nervous about coming into the room. When the kids stepped back, Cassie quickly moved closer. She spoke quietly, her eyes glistening. "I thought we were going to lose you. Andy, I care about you so much." I was taken aback. Could it be true that Cassie still had feelings for me? In that moment, all I wanted was to draw her near. Finally, she pulled back and smiled at me warmly. "I thought you would be back in Austin," I said, my voice still shaky. "I understand why you would think that," she replied, her eyes showing a bit of pain. "But we've been here the whole time. Nothing could have kept us away." "What about your job? What about the kids' school?" I asked. Cassie shook her head and glanced at Sally and Kevin, who both nodded in agreement. Sally chimed in, "Dad, there's no way any of us were going to leave you alone." Sally was feeling very emotional. The thought of losing their dad made her voice shake, and she fought back tears. Kevin noticed his sister's struggle and spoke up. "Dad, how could you think we would leave you? We'll catch up on school later. We just want you to get better so we can go home together." "The kids are right," Cassie said gently. "We'll handle everything when we get back. For now, you need to focus on getting well." She looked down for a moment before sitting beside me on the bed. I really want to say sorry for how I've treated you. I've told the kids about everything that's happened between us over the past few years. I told them about Ted Walker and what almost happened, and they've forgiven me. Now, I'm asking you to forgive me too. I care about you deeply, and I want you to know that. Until then, I had felt like I was surrounded by darkness. I was mainly focused on getting better, but I feared I would be going back to a life without Cassie. Now, for the first time, the darkness seemed to lighten, or at least I hoped it would, but I needed to hear more from Cassie. Taking my hand, Cassie started to explain. That night in the hallway, I thought I had ruined our family. Please believe me, nothing inappropriate occurred with Ted. I was foolish to think he wanted to help me advance in my career. He just had other motivations. When you saw me, Ted was trying to get close to me, and I realized then that he was not trustworthy. I was heartbroken when that letter came with your return ticket to Austin. Hearing Cassie talk about Ted made me feel relieved. It was comforting to know she finally saw him for who he really was. I regret ever thinking he was better than you, Cassie continued, her cheeks a little flushed. He uses his charm to get his way, but really he's just a coward. But he's leading the committee for the junior partnership, I reminded her. Doesn't that hurt your chances? No, because I resigned. I was shocked by her words. Cassie's dream had always been to become a partner at a major accounting firm, and now she had given that up. But why? I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Cassie leaned in and smiled warmly at me, her eyes reflecting a blend of affection and sincerity. I knew I couldn't help right now, but there was something I missed for a long time. Cassie gently touched my face and continued speaking. Most of my life, I was chasing a dream that wasn't really mine. Growing up, I saw how hard my dad worked to become a partner. He talked about it all the time, almost like it was an obsession. But he died before he could achieve that dream. Without realizing it, his hopes turned into mine. But when I thought I might lose you, I saw how foolish I had been. Looking closely at my job, it was clear I would never become a partner. I just wasn't cut out for it. If I kept going in that direction, I would fail like my dad and risk losing my family. So I sent my resignation the day after the event. I told them I needed to be with you. I also made it very clear that I couldn't work with Ted Walker anymore. What did Mr. Bracken say? I was shocked by Cassie's choice, but if this was true, I was thrilled she was going to do it. He hasn't accepted my resignation, Cassie said. He wants to talk when I return to Austin. From now on, my family needs to come first, but without my salary, we won't be able to keep our house. I've already put it up for sale. I hope it sells quickly because we can't afford the mortgage. So you're telling me we're going to struggle, I said with a little laugh. Cassie chuckled. Maybe we'll have a tough time at first, but my husband is going to be a great writer. I laughed too, even though my side hurt a bit. Well, maybe not a great writer, but I hope he'll be a good one. Andy, can you ever forgive me for doubting you and thinking you weren't enough? I love you deeply. There's no one else for me. All I've ever wanted is to love you and be loved by you. I gave her a tight hug despite the pain. I never wanted to let her go, but after a moment the hurt was too much. What can I get you? Cassie asked as she stood up. Can you tell me what happened after I was shot? I asked. No one here speaks enough English to explain. My TV doesn't work and all the papers I've received are in Spanish. Are you sure you want to hear about that? Cassie asked, looking concerned. I nodded. I can't recall all the details, Cassie said. You could check the numbers when we get home. From what I remember, about 12 of President Sanchez's security team lost their lives. Another 6 or 7 were injured, including Captain Lopez. I remember that 26 guests were involved in the incident and 7 of them died. Around 40 or 50 attackers were taken down in the hotel and about the same number was apprehended. Many more were arrested or killed in Mexico City and northern Mexico. What about Peter and Billy? They got out okay. Pete had been hurt, but it wasn't too serious. He would need to wear a sling for a few weeks. What about your co-workers? I asked. Everyone at my office is fine, but it could have been worse. They discovered a lot of explosives. The attackers had planned to escape by helicopter and blow up the hotel after harming the president. The army stopped the helicopters before they could take off. My goodness, I said, feeling shocked. Do you know what messed up their plans? she asked. I shook my head. The police chief's conference, Cassie said with a laugh. Even though they weren't supposed to bring weapons into Mexico, nearly all the American police chiefs were armed. They caught the attackers by surprise in the stairway. It changed everything. I smiled and chuckled. You've got to appreciate Americans and their guns. After a week in the hospital, I was finally released, and we went home. I wouldn't say everything was perfect from that point on. We still had many challenges ahead. One of the biggest issues was that Cassie returned to her old job, supposedly part-time, but before long she was back to her busy schedule. Things came to a head the night before Kevin's soccer team was set to play in the regional finals. Cassie said she needed to meet with an important client. I didn't get angry. I just felt sad. Cassie, can we please talk about this? I asked gently. Andy, this client is important. I can't miss this meeting, she replied. Cassie, you can choose what you want to do, but think about this. You only get so many special moments with your kids. Do you want to look back one day and realize you've missed most of them? If you think your job is more important, you might find the kids have grown up and don't want to spend time with you anymore. Cassie argued that this client represented a big part of the firm's income. I told her I had said everything I could, and I wouldn't mention it again. I felt sad knowing that Cassie was slipping back into her old habits, and there was nothing I could do. I believed she loved me and didn't really think about becoming partner, but if she kept going this way, eventually the kids and I might drift apart. On the day of Kevin's game, I stopped by Cassie's office to see if she had changed her mind. Her assistant let me know she was with the client. I went home, picked up the kids, and headed to the field. The sky was cloudy and it was a bit chilly. Perfect weather for a game. I was watching Kevin's team warm up when someone sat next to me. I turned and saw it was Cassie. She leaned over and gave me a gentle smile. You were right. It was a perfect day, one of those rare moments that make you smile. Cassie called the client to explain about her son's soccer game, and they were glad to change the appointment. Kevin's team won with a score of 5-3, and Kevin even scored one of the goals. We went out to celebrate afterward, and that night Cassie and I enjoyed a memorable time together until the early hours. Epilogue. The day before I left the hospital, I had an unexpected visitor. Cassie and the kids were busy packing for our trip home when a man appeared in my doorway. It was President Sanchez, accompanied by Captain Lopez. I was relieved to see that the captain looked okay, even with a noticeable scar on his cheek and a bandage on his hand. Mr. Spencer, the president said as I got up to shake his hand. Instead of shaking it, he gave me a warm hug. I'm so happy to see you up and well. I was worried we might lose you. The world can't afford to lose good people. Let's sit down. I have something important to discuss. I took a seat while the president settled across from me. We talked about how we were both doing after the challenging times. The president mentioned that he spoke on television that day to reassure the people of Mexico that we will address the issues with the cartels. Captain Lopez stood by the door, ever the loyal protector. I'm really pleased to see you recovering, Mr. Spencer, the president said, giving my leg a gentle pat. I stopped by not only to show my personal gratitude, but also on behalf of the Mexican people. Thank you, Mr. President. But really, I was just looking out for my family, I replied. I understand that, but it doesn't diminish how you helped us in that fight against the cartels, the president said, glancing at Captain Lopez. I wanted to present this on TV, but the captain advised me it might put you and your family at risk. The captain stepped forward and took a box from his coat pocket. The president opened it to reveal a beautiful medal with an eagle holding a snake. I wasn't sure what it symbolized. Could you please stand? The president asked. When we were both standing, he placed the medal around my neck. On behalf of the people of Mexico, it is my honor to give you the Order of the Aztec Eagle for your assistance in the initial battle against the drug cartels. The president greeted me with a kind gesture and shook my hand. Captain Lopez smiled and offered a supportive embrace. Mr. Spencer, the president continued, the Order of the Aztec Eagle is the highest honor Mexico gives to someone who is not a citizen. You are a courageous individual. Thank you. I'm truly honored, I replied, searching for the right words. I feel honored and a little shy. I only did what I thought anyone would do. I don't feel like I truly earned this. Yes, you absolutely did, the president said firmly. This is the least we can offer. You deserve so much more. Perhaps when we finally overcome the drug problem, we can celebrate the real heroes of this fight. But sadly, I must leave now. I have many duties and very little time. Just like that, the president was gone. Cassie and the kids were really impressed when I showed them the medal and shared that the president had given it to me. Right after that, something significant happened at Cassie's old workplace. Ted was let go. Well, let go isn't quite right. Because of a rule in the partnership agreement, he was bought out for a lot less than his share was worth. Ted thought about contesting the decision, but when his past behavior became public, he decided to leave quietly. Somehow, a video of him looking uneasy in a helicopter appeared online. There was also footage of him hiding behind pool chairs. I have a feeling either Peter or Billy shared those videos, but I haven't had a chance to ask them yet. I also learned something surprising about Ted Walker and his wife. She didn't arrive late. Ted had just told her he needed to work that first day. His focus was not on work, but on pursuing my wife. When everything came to light, Ted's wife filed for divorce. She had hired someone to investigate and found out about his indiscretions. After seeing his behavior, she wanted nothing to do with him. I heard that Ted moved to California. It's a fitting place for him, full of stories that don't always match the truth. Maria's 3-part documentary received amazing reviews and reached a huge audience. The attention from the incident at the Fantasia Hotel helped too. Maria even won an Emmy for her work, and Peter received a Pulitzer Prize for his film about the cartel incident. And yes, Maria does call me occasionally. Most of the time, she wants to chat. Sometimes, she has a writing job for me. She also has a new boyfriend who runs several tuxedo shops and is active in charity work. They met at one of his events. I saw a picture, and he seems nice enough, though nothing too special. From the way Maria talks about him, I can tell she's quite content. I genuinely hope it works out for them. The good news that I hadn't shared with Cassie when she was thinking about leaving me was that I found a literary agent. He liked all 3 of my books. Yes, I've written a 3rd one, and he liked that one a lot. This is a book that continues Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. It's called A Christmas Tale Completed, The Redemption of Jacob Marley. My agent believes it's the best Christmas story in 100 years, and who am I to argue with him? I just hope he can persuade a publisher. After the soccer game, Cassie decided to break away from her old job and start her own practice at our new home. Even when her firm offered her a junior partnership, Cassie chose to decline. Our new home is an old farmhouse. It has a den and a sitting room downstairs, along with a big living room, dining room, eat-in kitchen, and a bathroom. Upstairs, there are 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. We turned the den and sitting room into offices. Cassie chose the sitting room because it's near the front door and there's enough space in the hall for a desk and some chairs. I took the den at the back of the house because it's quiet. I still take on writing assignments whenever I can. I made quite a bit of money writing about the attack and agreed to write a book about my experience, which came with a nice advance. A funny thing about Cassie's accounting practice is that when she gets really busy, I help her out. I always liked working with numbers. I just didn't enjoy the office drama. With Cassie's private practice, there are no politics, and my reward for helping is a happy home life. It's pretty great. We have had some ups and downs. We were worried when Cassie found a lump in her breast, but thankfully it turned out to be harmless. Kevin had a serious car accident right after he got his license. Luckily, he only broke his wrist and had some cuts. He healed completely and now drives very carefully. Sally is in college, and not surprisingly, she's studying accounting. She has a steady boyfriend who seems nice, and he fits in well with our family, but it's too soon to know if he's the right one. It might sound strange, but when I think back to that day in Mexico City, I feel a bit grateful for what the cartels attempted. Of course, not for the harm they caused, but I have 2 reasons for my feeling. First, after the attack on President Sanchez, the Mexican and American governments began working closely together to fight against the drug cartels. They have made a significant impact on the cartel's ability to operate. Second, and most importantly to me, is that it helped strengthen my marriage. I managed to regain the love and respect of my wife. Hey audience, if you liked this video and want to keep up with more thrilling stories, make sure to subscribe to Prince Cheating Tales and hit the notification bell. You don't want to miss out on our upcoming adventures. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next wonderful story.